Hello, this is Chris Maynard from CMI VFX, and this is a very interesting training video about the creation of digital foliage. In the past, we have shown you how to mathematically create trees, plants, and flowers using the L systems equations inside of Houdini. While that method can be very effective for a variety of scenarios, it lacks the speed required to build large scenes of forests or highly detailed landscapes. Today, we'll be discussing the SpeedTree modeler application. To better note its work, it has not only been used in a plethora of 3D video games, but was a key component in the creation of Pandora for the film Avatar. SpeedTree is not just a single tree modeler. It can be used to create ecosystems on imported geometry, as well as open up to third-party applications using the SDK. This allows for flexibility for very complex scenes that would otherwise require its own modeler to be built. This application has the ability to reference its own catalog of trees, like the Kapok tree that you see here, but it can also be used to quickly hand model your own inventions creations. Parts can be modified in third-party modeling applications to allow for more robust solutions like perhaps a tree house or a tunnel through a California giant redwood tree. What we will be talking about today in this video is a basic general usage of the application and a quick introduction to using it in a third-party application. Currently, their most actively supported applications is with Houdini and 3D Studio Max. Some of the CMI VFX team and some of the IDVC team work together on creating an import tool for Houdini that creates final shaders with all the trimmings such as ambient occlusion, subsurface scattering, displacements, and normals detailing. I've also had some amazing success using SpeedTree in Cinema 4D and have recently been using imported FBX option for Nuke, Fusion, and Flame. These last three require a little bit of repiping of textures, but it's incredible to see such high quality tree models right inside of your compositor. SpeedTree can also render out still frames with an alpha. This makes it extremely useful for composites and Photoshop imagery. IDVC is working on future tools that will help impact on the way we use foliage in the future. Imagine a real-time rendered forest based on video game technology. It's very close, so keep your eyes on the future. I'm personally making this video to get people interested in this product first. It's a must-have. It makes adding 3D animated trees to your scene a reality. By now, I hope you're really excited about this application and you're ready to watch the second chapter. Okay, the first thing that you notice when you first start off the SpeedTree application is that it's multiple zones, or it's panes, it's window panes. You might actually see the simple mode selection when you first start up. It depends on how many times you've entered into the application. It sort of remembers the last default. So what this does is it actually lets you access the user manual system, as you can see here. So any one of these, let me go ahead and minimize this for you. Any one of these topics are available inside of the system, and you can of course go through and find the specific things that you want to find out about. Now this is a very fast way to remember some things that you couldn't remember previously, so I highly recommend jumping back and forth, and the search really helps depending on what you're looking for. Let's say occlusion, for example. If I go ahead and hit that, you'll see that the first object's ambient occlusion, and you can find out more about the particular topic. So this is a great way to get started. Switching to complete mode is the same thing as selecting it from up here, but this is the main first window that you'll have to be concerned about. The rest of them will go in order to sort of solve what they are. Now, the first thing you'll need to do is create a new document or open an existing tree. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and open an existing tree from the library, and I'm going to go ahead and open up the barrel cactus because it's a pretty simple construct. And there it is. And as you notice, I can go ahead and click in the scene, and I can rotate with my left mouse button. My right mouse button brings up a contextual menu. So you'll have to rely on the scroll wheel or the holding down the scroll wheel and panning left and right. Now if you don't have a scroll wheel, there are some modifier keys such as the Shift and Alt or Shift and Option, depending on if you're OS 10 or Windows or Linux for that matter, and that'll get you into zoom back and forth. So at least you'll need the other two mouse buttons. Now this works well also with the Apple mouse. It works well with the Logitech 3-button mouse. And it works well with the same configuration inside of Linux. So no matter what operating system or platform you're on, there is a solution for navigating into the system. Now, this is a pretty simple item here, right? We have a trunk, we have a flower at the top, and we have spines, these little guys that are popping off the outside edge. And all of them have textures. So depending on what object that I'm selecting, of course, it'll have different parameters in the left-hand side. And all the objects that make up a particular tree, in this case this is a tree, are here in this generation tab. Now we can go ahead and increase the size of anything in the UI just by simply grabbing these little handles here and moving them up or down. So we've just zoomed in to our node graph. Now we can use the middle mouse button scroll wheel to do the same kind of navigations, holding it down, moving left and right. My mouse is a little bit old, so it's causing some problems, but you can see that I have all the options for building a tree is right here. And of course, right-clicking gives you an additional menu system. Sorry, let me go ahead and move my menu over. You can see that if I wanted to create a branch off of this tree, I could do so quite easily. And we're going to do that in a few minutes. Now the texturing window, you'll see that there's things as color sets, there's materials, there's meshes. As you can see, based on the mesh right there, you can see the cactus spine. If you zoom in carefully, you can see that here is the spine. It's going off in several directions. This is referenced geometry, so you can go ahead and import geometry and do the same kind of thing. Of course, you have your masks, which will work with the terrain, and the displacements, which we'll get into as well. So, changing the orientation of the user interface is something that I usually do. I don't like my output down here, so what I like to do is I can pop this off, of course, and it'll move to a different location. I like to go ahead and kill that because it's not something that I need to watch. But I do like to leave up my help menu in case I need to change some parameters. And if you're in the complete mode, you'll easily see as you roll over individual panes, the menu changes for the help. So if you look at the, let's say we'll select this object here and we'll go into the random seeds, you can see that the random seeds menu is now available inside of the help. Now here's a nice little thing to customize your parameters panel. Since you're spending most of your time in your parameters panel, what you got to do is figure out how to make it best work for you. Now I am a slider guy. I like to, let me go ahead and see if I can find a slider. What I'll do is I'll turn off the stacking so that I don't have to see all my topics. I can actually go ahead and just move up and down. Now whenever I find a slider like this guy here, we can change that to, let me go ahead and turn updating off on the help. We can go ahead and change that to a numerical input. So if you're a Nuke user, or if you've ever used Nuke, for example, you know that you're kind of stuck with this kind of scenario. But really, sliders are like, you know, much easier to use. So it gives you a nice option to go ahead and change the, you know, the different types of stuff. And you'll notice that inside the property filter, you'll have the ability to filter out a particular thing. So for example, if we just want to see segments, the best thing we can do is just type in the word segments, and now we have everything that's related to the segment according to this particular search. Go ahead and clear it out by hitting on the red X, or the black X rather, and we'll go over the last little functionality thing of the window, and that's these little editors. Whenever you click on a particular editor, you'll see you'll get like a little graph that you can sort of draw. So if I wanted to find something interesting, I guess I could go into the size scaler, and you can see that now we're adjusting the size of the scale. And let's say if I wanted to get into a little bit more detail, we'll go into the we'll find something that applies to our particular tree here, and we'll look at the branch. Now if we go ahead and modify this, you can see that we can now taper in this particular branch. Now the rest of our imported geometry is not actually following with that. This might be different when you're actually creating a tree from scratch, so just be wary that sometimes the imported geometry doesn't always work out exactly the way you want on extreme types of angles like this. But again, you might never see that problem occur. You know, as you can actually see that it is trying to hug a little bit to some level, and then it starts to lose a little bit of its connection. But this is a very rare situation for this particular item. So the next thing I'd like to do is talk about all the things inside of the viewport window. This is basically what you want to be able to see and why. Now, to take you through this a little bit better, I'll go into a different tree. So I'm going to close off this tree, and let's go ahead and create our own tree. Or let's go ahead and open a little bit more obvious tree. Let's see here. Let's go to the American elm. And I'm going to go ahead and grab the real time, which means that this is a lower geometry set. The regular ones that don't have the words RT on the back, these are highly detailed trees. So I'm going to go ahead and use the RT trees for now, since we are in a screen recording and I'd like to preserve as much of the memory as possible. I'll go ahead and close this up. Now, the first thing you'll do is say, okay, there's a tree up, but there's very little amount of parameters. You got to watch out for your scroll bar. If you move this up, you'll be able to see that the parameters are back where you need them to be. So let's go ahead and talk about these top buttons here. If you go into the render mode, this allows you to see whether you want like a wireframe or whatever involved with the particular scene. So that's up to you. So what I like to do is find the best one for me, and let's see here. We had our, which one were we using? It's not bad. Let's go ahead and put lit shaded. Okay, so the one on the bottom is progressively the best one according to this menu system. And then of course you can turn off the leaves, and you can turn off the branches and the main branch, and of course the zone. So this is a good way to memory manage your scene as best as possible. Now it says exporting not supported in this version. It is completely supported in this version. So if you're seeing anything like this and you think it's a licensing issue, go ahead and report that to support. But in the meantime, you have also something like the wind. If a tree can support the wind, it'll actually use the wind right here. And inside the wind, of course, you have the gusting on and off. Now, I bring this up because when you're exporting trees, you're going to need to clarify if this is going to be an animated tree or a static tree. And you might want to think about this depending on what you're trying to do. I mean, if you're going to use a movie poster, for example, and you want to create a giant tree, you obviously don't need to export anything like that. But if you're going to be doing some close-up shots or passing a camera through some digital foliage, obviously you're going to need to make sure that the animation is exactly the way you want. So, that's where you find that right there. And of course, you can edit the global wind parameters. But let's go ahead and turn that off for now. So again, with interactive lighting, you can go ahead and change everything in real time. And of course, because of normal mapping, you'll see that you got a pretty detailed thing. Even though this is our real-time version, you've got a pretty good preview going on here. So when you do export out your models and tweak them in your third-party applications, you get some pretty impressive quality, even with the lower resolution trees. So think about that when you're doing large forests and you need background trees. You don't always need to put the best foot forward in situations sort of like that. So the next thing we'll talk about is adjusting different parameters. So let's go ahead and select a tree. Now you'll see inside of here that there's forces added. There's gravity, there's gnarl, and there's curl that have been added to this particular tree. These are forces that allow shaping of the tree up and beyond the initial parameters that you get for the actual trunk. Now, depending on, of course, what you select, you can also apply forces to individual things. In this case, we have 3 items in here that we could edit. So I'm going to go ahead and use the gravity, and if I change some of the parameters, in this case I'm just rotating the gravitational pull, you can see that it actually changes quite easily the shape of the tree. So everything in the viewport is completely manageable by interactive manipulators such as this for all the forces. The rest of the time, when you're creating a particular change, you can go into the parameters and start making the changes here. You will see them near real time depending on your GPU, and this is like an NVIDIA FX 4000 on a Mac. The 6000 on the Linux system worked really nice, so it all depends on the interaction speed, but overall it's pretty fast. For example, the jink parameter, this is something that gives you like hard edges in their branching, so like almost a square type of edge. But you can see as I'm changing this parameter, it updates in real time. So that's really nice. And bifurcation, the splitting of the branches or whatnot. And we'll go through all these parameters in a little bit. This is just a general overview of the interface. So without further ado, let's go ahead and terminate that, and we'll start creating our own tree system using some of the parameters and start from scratch. Now, whenever you're working with items such as a forest or something with a large variety of trees, it's best to go ahead and check out all the different possible options you have to start off with a template of some kind. Now, the SpeedTree people have included a bunch of different trees, all based on real algorithms. So you have to look at the different items that you want to start off with and then modify them from there. So that would be the first way of working. The alternative would be to create hand-drawn trees. So in order to best take a look at how trees grow in nature, it's a good thing to go ahead and look at photos on Flickr and maybe copy one of these words and then paste it in the Flickr to sort of compare, to make sure they're exactly what they what they want to look like for your particular scene. And of course, just because this is American sycamore in my backyard, it might look completely different if it was in a different part of the country, just because that's how nature works. So what you really should do is take a look at the speedtree.com and then /trees, and this will give you the particular library of trees that they have. And of course, you can look at them in 3 dimensions if you want to as well, just by clicking on the navigation and going around the different items. But let's say for now we're not really interested in looking at that. We just want to take a look at some of the different trees and see what they have to offer. And of course, as you cycle through, you could see if they have fall or whatnot, autumn, if some people don't use the word fall. And again, here is a maple tree that we did for the Pliffus Lake. And here are some other options. You can see that there's dust, that's an option. You got grapevines. You can see the vines, how they grow. So it's really a good idea to go ahead and look through all these different items. You'll see the library version 6 is here, and then it goes down to the library 5.2. Now, and actually there's a previous version 5.0. Now some of these may not work absolutely perfectly in the latest version of SpeedTree, so make sure that your trees are approved for the latest version. So if they do open, the wind might not actually be updated, so I'm sure they would fix that for you right away if something like that happened. Now, to go ahead and close this off, I went and reformatted the, let's go to this tree here. I went to a new user interface layout so that you could see it a little bit closer. Now, I got rid of the help, and the current node graph is very, very tiny, so I'll have to move that around from time to time. But I wanted to show you what a real-time tree looks like compared to a high-resolution tree up close, because I know I mentioned it in the last chapter, but I didn't really get into it too much. So this is just a Douglas fir from their vast library of trees. And the tree library is actually bigger than it looks like online. So I'll show you that later on in a different chapter. Now, this is the high resolution tree. You can see that the branches, the caps, and the fronds have a particular amount of triangles. And at any point, you can zoom in and you can sort of see, if it's got the normals and displacements going on. And in this case, a high resolution tree is very inclined to have displacements turned on. Now, displacements can be either driven from the default algorithm, or it can be driven from a texture. And in my opinion, textures generate, for the most part, the best displacements. So if I was to select this particular trunk here, and then I went to, let's say, the displacement tab right here, it says using the texture coordinates and using the material. So it's actually getting the displacement from this particular material. Now, we're not using normals in this particular resolution tree. So what we'll do is we'll look at the Douglas fir real-time tree, and you'll see that it looks like a little bit different than before. So we're not getting the same amount or same quality with the high resolution. Now, the resolution can also come from how many quads or triangles it has in a particular square space area. Parameterization, it's also known as, if you're a NURBS modeler of some kind. So what you want to do is find the resolution that gets the job done, and then you can tweak it to fit the exact particular situation that you need, which is fairly simple. Now, when you're starting a new tree, of course, you also want to define some of the other parameters, like do the branches, are they made out of triangles, or are they made out of quadrangles? So you would just go ahead and select the quads, because 99% of people out there like quads in the film and television circuit. So you go ahead and do that, and all of a sudden things look a little bit nicer. Now, this is definitely using a normals map of some kind to help portray even more detail into the solution. So if I went and looked to see if it had a displacement, it would be using the material and the texture coordinates as well, but it's using less resolution instead. So we're not really substituting resolution for textures on this particular model, but you might want to do that when you bring it into your third-party model. Sometimes trees with no displacements at all work very well when only using a normal map. So that'll be up to you, and we'll show some examples of that later on in some other chapters. Now, you can see here, this is a live oak, and I apologize again for the lack of size, because we're working with a very limited situation here. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in and to show you some of the quality that you can get from the high resolution stuff. And this, of course, can be tweaked even higher. We can handle as much as the GPU can handle, and then the RAM will allow us to export. But you'll notice some interesting parts as we're going along here. You have roots that are blending into the trunk, the main trunk, which has bifurcation, which is splitting up the branches. You have this moss and the leaves, twigs, and stuff like that. So there's a lot of stuff being introduced into this particular model. So if we're going into this would be the high resolution, but if we're looking at a lower resolution, you'll notice that the polygon count is a lot lower, and you have less detail on these hanging items, and the roots are now no longer there, because it's adding too many triangles that are unnecessary for the particular scene. So we'll scroll that back, and as you look at it, you really can't tell that this is a low resolution mesh, so it actually is quite adequate for what people need to use. So just take into consideration whether you want to use more of a real-time kind of thing or a live oak kind of thing. And I've been working on, with some of my team, some real-time tree rendering solutions, so that you never actually have to do any rendering of trees. A forced 4K thing will happen in about 4 seconds. And what happens is that you need to generate the textures and normals to work with such a thing. And a good example of that would be the Maya Viewport 2.0, which is also in Softimage, and I believe it's also on Max. So you can get some real-time renderings, but by default, these items don't come in perfectly into those applications without a little bit of tweaking. There are always some issues, but really easy to fix if you know what you're doing. So let's go ahead and close out of that. And of course, we changed a couple things, so I'll go ahead and remove that. Okay, and the next thing that we'll talk about is, instead of using a sample from the library, which is usually the best way to go, you can go ahead and start creating your own geometry. And the next chapter is going to focus on creating your own trees. Okay, so we're going to do a little fun project before we get to a more complicated project. I think that repetition is the best way to learn an application. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus on creating a basic tree with some foliage and some textures that we're going to import from another project. So the best thing we could do is go ahead and say File New to create a new scene, and inside of this scene you're going to see that we have a pretty basic layout. I've reorganized the nodes to be underneath the viewer as opposed to underneath here, just so we can have a little bit more space to work with at this recording size. So if you remember from the previous chapters, I did show you how to create a trunk using the hand drawing technique, which is holding down the space bar and sort of creating a unique kind of thing like this. So what we're going to do is once we have created something like this, I'm going to further tweak it. We can actually undo it and keep sort of doing it until we find the perfect shape that we like. So I'm going to do it a couple times because I'm not liking this exactly. Alright, so this is going to be my base. I'm going to create sort of like an old kind of apple tree that's sort of bent over and reaching for the sun. And you'll notice that there is this little button up here called Allow Node Editing. It's also invoked by hitting the Tab key. I'm going to go ahead and select my object, and I've already pre-selected that button so you can sort of see what's going on. Now I'm going to use my middle mouse to bring in, and I'm going to start tweaking some of these items a little bit. These are the general vertex points for the main shape, and by tweaking them you can sort of get the desired shape that you're looking for. Now if I mess up, I can always hit undo and just organize them. Now these tangents are broken points. You can see that I have to adjust each individual vertex based on an edit with these little additional points here, which are the tangent breakpoints. They are not connected, so you have to always sort of smooth them out in order to get that desired look that you're looking for. Now I'm not crazy about this shape yet, so I'm just going to make a couple more modifications. And that's the good thing about this application, is it really takes the hard work out of creating a very desired look. If I wanted to go ahead and create like an interesting twist, for example, I could easily do that using these modifiers. Now later on we can introduce some of the dynamic forces that allow you to manipulate trees as well, and we will do that. I just want to get this really nice kind of curve going on. Now because I want this tree base to be a little bit more robust, what we'll have to do is, let's say we're going to stop the editing of that, and now we have to sort of dive into some of the random settings inside of these controls. Now the best thing to do is to just sort of trial and error half of these things, because there's a lot of them. But I like to start up at the top and see where I like to make changes. The first thing is the size scaler. That's just going to adjust the size of the tree. And the best thing to do is actually click on these little graph editors, and if you just sort of manipulate them, you get a good idea of what these parameters are about. And most of these settings have those, which is really nice. We're going to keep on going down until we find the random IC. That's actually going to mess up our tree a little bit. If you keep on clicking on randomize until you get the desired result, that's always an interesting way to go about it. We want to have a really high textured tree, so I'm going to leave this randomization here. I want it to be really fat on the bottom, and we'll keep on going down. The segments, this is going to allow for the resolution of the tree. So if I increase the segments, you can see that we're sort of getting a lot of resolution coming in here. Now you can see clearly that there is something going on with this particular joint. So I'm going to select this and make sure that our guys aren't overlapping here. We want to keep that from overlapping to make sure that there's the least amount of potential displacement errors. And that looks like that's going to be adequate enough, plus with texturing and the additional displacements on top, it's going to be fine. Now the multiplier just increases the resolution, of course. Now you want to be careful on how much resolution you're going to have, right? Because this is going to be something that your final destination renderer is going to have to deal with at some time. So we can rely on normal mapping and displacement mapping. So I'm just going to keep a moderate amount to keep our memory management in check. We can also go ahead and see how we can raise the resolution, with some of our other parameters. I like to check every single one of these actually. And let's go ahead and keep going down to the branch here. I'm going to increase the amount of flares along the bottom to 6, 7 there. This will give us a much more interesting looking base. And of course I can adjust some of these other parameters. Let's see which one. Not all the parameters are going to actually produce results, so this is why a trial and error is actually pretty important when it comes to this. I'm going to turn off our stacking so that we can see what's going on a little bit better. The the height, we have a nice effect going on here, which I like. Okay, so that only that point is going to work for me on the height, which is nice. The length, I don't think we are getting any results from the length or anything tangible. Now we have a nice fat base. You can see where the stars are starting to pick up. I'm going to increase the balance a little bit. This is going to make it so that the tree needs roots inside the ground in order to stay balanced. That's what the balance name is coming from. I don't like the number of stars at the bottom here, so I'm going to select that one. And the tree looks like it's a little bit too hunched over for my taste. I'm going to kind of reduce that a little bit. And maybe make it like this. This is looking a little bit kind of interesting. And notice the height of the person. This is the height of the tree. So I will actually go back later and increase the general height with our size scaler. Matter of fact, I can go ahead and do that now. It's a good idea to remember what tab you're in so you can come back to it. This is the branch tab. So I'm just going to go scoot up here into the main area. Select my tree, of course. And in the generation, the size scaler, I generally like to keep it at 1, but in this particular case, I'm going to modify it slightly like that. And that's about the size of the trunk that I am looking for. Now, I'm going to create a couple other branches using the random techniques. So let's go ahead and see if we leave this like this, we can always come back and make some modifications to it. But let's say I want to wrap this up a little bit earlier than later. Inside of the texture coordinates, we don't need to do anything with that yet. The materials, we're going to create some, but inside of the displacement, you can see that the displacement is currently activated as noise. This is an internal algorithm generated by SpeedTree. Let's go ahead and open this up a little bit so we can see. Now this algorithm can be altered by selecting the texture. In this case, this is the branch, and the cap would be the cap up here. But let's say we're selecting the branch and we want to use the material. The material has to be created first before it actually works. So you can see that by selecting it, it's now smooth. So we're going to go ahead and leave it as noise for now, so we can sort of see what's going on. But later we're going to select it by using our materials palette, which is going to be done in a couple minutes. So let's keep on going through and see if we have anything else that we want to set. The ambient occlusion doesn't need to be done now. The level of detail, this is actually very important for people who are doing forests. You can see the optimization. There's a ramp going on right here. If I was to increase this ramp, you can see the resolution starting to update here, and getting less and less and less. If I was to decrease this, you would see the resolution increasing. The segment, this is also the distance between the different vertexes. So how many segments we want. We can increase the resolution up near the top if we needed to, but of course we want to keep that to a minimum. So this is where a lot of the level of detail, or LOD, is going to take place for your third-party applications. It's a great functionality for an application. This is something that I wish every CG application had sort of built inside of it, of course. But nevertheless, the bones. There's bones actually being sent through all of these different items, and you can show the extras just like this. If I was to go ahead and grab a point and move it out, you can see the bones through there starting to increase or to be visible. You can actually show normals, you could show hints, and you can show that as well. So let's go ahead and let's turn off all the extras because I don't really need to see them. So we'll just go ahead and get our tree looking as good as possible. That's great. Now, moving right along, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the node editing because we don't need that at this particular time. The wind, if we applied wind to this, let me go ahead and save out this document. That would be a good place to start. So let me go ahead and save this as the Dream Tree 02, and I'll hit save. and I'm sure you guys know how to save, so we don't need to see that dialog box in its entirety. So now if I was to go ahead and apply wind and select the wind button here, you'll see that this thing is now jiggling back and forth in the wind. You'll need to adjust the weight for something like this. I prefer to leave trunks like this at its maximum, but you know, everything that you do and add animation vertex cache, when you bring it into the other apps, it's just going to have a little bit more you know, weight to it. And I always turn off degusting. Degusting parameter is something that never really looked that real to me, but you know, with the wind it actually looks pretty good. But obviously for a trunk like this we don't want to have the wind on, so we're going to go ahead and turn the wind off. And as for the physics with the structure that was going inside of it with the bones and stuff like that, of course you can select the bone profile here and go ahead and increase it, but let's leave it by default right now because we're not even going to use that when we export it to our CG application. That's something that we could later use to control as a character if we wanted to have like a tree character, which is completely possible inside of SpeedTree. So the very next thing that we're going to do is we have this giant tree trunk here, and we're going to want to put some sort of branches on it. So there's several different ways to go about this. We can select inside of the node tree our trunk and right click. You'll see add a template to selected, and of course the branches section. We can add knot holes, which is pretty cool. You can see that we have these knot holes down here, and pardon the mouse clicking here. You can see that the knot holes are now been added to the tree. Now our tree is not going to have any knot holes, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. So I will go ahead and add a template, branches, and let's go to standard RT, real time. And it's not connected because we did not have anything selected, but we're going to take this level 1 and level 2, and we're just going to drag this directly to the trunk. And you can see now that our tree has now started to grow a little bit, and now we have like some interesting things happening here. We may also want to add a little bit more to our tree. This looks like it's a little bit sparse, not really very full, more like a dead tree. So let's say we want to add a little bit more life to the tree. We could go ahead back to the trunk and add another branches, same kind of thing here. And let's say we add it to the trunk, and we'll actually need to sort of randomize it. So if we go into its settings here, we can sort of randomize the seeds a little bit, and now we have a much fuller tree just with 2 sets of branches going on. Now I double clicked that down here and it compressed, so to uncompress it you just sort of double click and it brings it back. Now we have a pretty interesting looking tree going on. And again, this is the basic tree tutorial. So we want to add some foliage to that, and in order to add some foliage to that, we're going to go ahead and right click, and from the templates let's go ahead into the leaves, and let's go ahead and say single leaf or standard real time. It's your choice. I'm just going to go ahead and say standard real time, and you can see that on one set of our branches we have some leaves, and on the other set we do not. So we're going to also say, okay, we want the same kind of thing going on this one, so we'll right click on it and say add leaves, and we'll say standard, and it went down here, so we'll just go ahead and drag and drop, and now what we have is a complete tree that, you know, has a polygon facing sort of scenario going on, which doesn't always translate to your CG application. So we'll take into into consideration that a little bit later. But if I hit the wind button, you notice that all the tree trunks and branches are static, yet the leaves are actually moving in the wind, which is something that's more realistic. So what we can do is then start to create some textures for this with a very basic tutorial. So with your material tablet or your material palette set up right here, what we're going to do is just click on the little plus button, which is right here, and I'm going to go ahead and just steal textures from the apple tree. So let's say we want to have the tree bark, the apple tree bark. I'm going to select that, and it's going to go ahead and find the naming conventions such as the apple tree bark normal. And now what we have is we have two textures imported because of the naming conventions, and one is the normal, which is like a pseudo bump map, and the other one is the texture file. So what we'll do is we'll select the main branch here, and we'll look for the materials tab, which is right here, and you'll see that, okay, here's our branch. So it looks like we should be able to select something, but that's sort of just how the GUI is. You want to select the plus function, and then inside of the material, of course, you want to change that to the apple tree bark. So this is our apple tree bark right here, which is kind of nice. Now we want to also give that the proper displacement. So inside of the displacement, we can select from the branch the use material, and what happens is that it finds the actual displacement from the texture material here and it applies it to the actual tree itself. Now you can see that we have a broken branch here. So what we can do is change that cap by adding another cap texture. We'll just go ahead into our open texture button and we'll look for the cap if it has one. So here is a cap 2. We're not going to be too picky. We're just going to go ahead and select it, and now it's got a cap 2 and a normal. So inside of our branch, we want to, sorry about that, I just had it. There's the cap. We want to go ahead and add a cap texture and select that from the drop-down list, and now we don't have that giant white piece sitting there. So as you may have guessed, we're going to repeat this for the branches. I mean, the branches inherited all the tree trunk, so we're not going to have to worry about this. But our leaves, we're going to want to add 2 sets of leaves because we do have 2 streams of leaves down here. So the easiest thing to do is go ahead and to your texture library, and you can go ahead and create one of these by photo referencing beforehand. I'm going to go ahead and select the apple tree leaves 1, and I'm going to import also the apple trees 2. All right, so we have significantly 2 different trees that you can totally tell. One has an alpha, which is important, the bump map, normal map, and the color texture. So what we'll do from there is we can either select it inside of our viewport or select it here, and scroll up to the point where it says leaves. Now it's not going to say materials, it actually says leaves here, so just note that the word difference, it means the same thing but it's said differently. And these are the geometry type as cards, which is correct, and if it was imported geometry we would see that there. For the material, we're going to go ahead and select the apple trees 1, and then we're going to select our second set of leaves and repeat the process and use the second texture. So now what we have is a tree that works with wind, and if you go ahead and hit the wind parameter there, you can see that it's actually working famously, which is great. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and end this tutorial by hitting the file save button, and we can move on to something a little bit different. Now for our last project for this free tutorial, I'm going to show you how to build the money tree. Yes, everyone wants one in their backyard, of course. Go ahead and plant a coin and out sprouts a brand new tree full of money. You can see here that our money tree has several different assets inside of it. We have coins as well as dollar bills, and you can see our coin asset here, and there's a gold one as well. Now what we'll want to do, there you go, is teach you how to use all these different assets inside of SpeedTree. So by default, SpeedTree gives you lots of options to create default trees, and I'm going to show you how to create a default tree with some parameters and add some custom objects to it as well. Now the first thing we need to do is say, okay, in order to build a money tree, what are the things that we are going to need? The first thing I did is I went out to Flickr and found some photos of some quarters and some dollar bills and stuff like that. Could have scanned them and took photos of myself, but someone already did a decent job taking the initial photos. So what I did is modeled them up in my favorite application, Actually, it's not my favorite application. It's just a application. There's some free modelers out there that you could use if you don't have a modeling application that you like. Wings3D.com is a free polygonal modeler that was based off the technology for the game creation engine Mirai and Nendo, the famous game modeler that started off the polygon modeling once again. I don't know if you guys remember quite a few years ago when Maya came out, NURBS modeling was the thing that everyone was doing. We went from polygon modeling to NURBS modeling. It was very popular. And then a fellow named Bay Rate started doing these amazing polygonal models and super fast speeds with the with this program called Mirai, M-I-R-A-I, and everyone moved over to polygonal modeling, and we even worked on a polygon model for the first Lord of the Rings creature, Gollum, which was using Mirai as the original model, which is cool. A little fact for you. Anyway, Wings3D.com is a free version of a very similar modeler. It works really fast. It's Polygon, and you can use it. A lot of people ask me how to use SpeedTree inside of Cinema 4D, so I actually used that to create my particular models. I needed to use body paint, and body paint is by far the best texture painter in my opinion. I know there's other ones out there on the market, but nothing seems to do the job as good as this for me. For more information, of course, we have a body paint video that's really good actually. And here is our coins. I have several different types. I'm going to go ahead and close off these, and I'll show you the model a little bit up close. Now, I created a simple UV layout, and I created the axis to be where I want the coin to dangle from. Now, you could have created a more robust looking coin. I just quickly mocked one up. But let's go ahead into the body paint UV layout edit, which is going to scale across the screen. So let me go ahead and shrink that window up for you. And of course, OS X is giving me a little bit of trouble. All right, there we go. So this is the UV layout. Now I'm going to go ahead and select this item and select the Show UV Mesh. And now we can look at our UV layout. What I did is I just took the front face and the back face and isolated them so our texture would be, you know, one image flat, and of course the edge of the coin, which I didn't really spend much time on because you can't really see the coins from the distance that we are rendering. So I saved a little bit of displacement time by not putting too much in there. All right, so we created our texture by painting it up and stuff like that. Well, I did anyway. So now we can go ahead and close out of this and look at the next step. Once you have a color texture, what you'll need to do is you'll need to create a normal map and some other maps if you want to use them. Now, SpeedTree uses a color map, a normal map, specular, and it also has an additional 2 channels for a detail map and the alpha, or the normal map for the detail map. Now, the detail map can have an alpha inside of it, and what it is like if you wanted to add moss or grunge or dirt to an additional, like a tree trunk, for example, you would put your normal textures down first, and then you would go ahead and add your grunge map to that, and it works very well. Anyway, in order to take a texture, and we're going to take our color texture, I'm going to open it up from a file, and I'm going to select the gold coin color, which is my default image. And the first thing you're going to see is not the actual texture itself, but you're going to say, okay, which one of these best represents the direction of the bump that you're looking to go in? And we're going to say this one, because this particular coin actually pushes out instead of in. And you can see that this is what we're looking at right away, which is the basic displacement. Now, to better take a look at it, we're going to select the diffuse color. Of course, you can also select the ambient occlusion option to get like the nice little dirt map, which we can export from this application directly. So instead of looking at the ball, I'm going to look at the box, and you can see that, yeah, this looks like a pretty good coin. As far as being a certain distance away from the camera and rendering, this is going to look just fine. So we're going to say, okay, sure. We can change all the settings here. Obviously, this is not much of a crazy bump tutorial as it is SpeedTree. So these are all the different maps that you can export: the occlusion, the specularity, and the diffuse. Now, I export all of these. This is our color texture, by the way. I export all of these because you're going to need to use them inside of your final rendering application. Because remember, SpeedTree can render actually can render still frames at this point, and in the future, hopefully, we'll be able to render long format frames. But in this case, we can render out a still frame and using the normal map and the specular and the color map in order to render out our objects. So in the meantime, you want to create all of these because you can use the displacement, the occlusion, the specularity in the application that you're going to render in, Houdini, for example. So let's go ahead and close this, and we'll go to create a brand new tree. Now, what we didn't really discuss before was some of the templates. Now, templates or STT files, I believe they are. These are just existing assets that you can use over and over again and access them through this right-click menu down here in the node graph. So for a template, we can go ahead and create our own actually and load this STT through that manner, but we're not going to create our own. You can save your own from the application itself. Just use the user manual and it gives you specific instructions on that. Now we're going to go ahead and add a basic trunk. So let's go ahead and say, okay, let's go to trunk and say I'm going to use the standard trunk. And you'll see that it did not add it to my zone, so it's not inside of my scene yet. Well, that's simple enough. Just got to go in here and drag over top of the tree, and you'll see that now we have our tree trunk in our zone. Now you can, in fact, if I held down the spacebar, for example, I could start drawing another asset. Actually, you could do that if I was in the default mode. I could have started off by drawing more than one tree trunk in a particular zone. Now, in this case, we already added a default. So let's go ahead and select that. And to continue on with our templating, let's go ahead and say Add Template, go to the branches, and I'm going to select the standard branch. Now, this branch, again, did not get connected, so I'm going to just drag and drop, and you'll see that we already have a tree based on the presets. Now, I would say that the majority of the work that you do is going to be either using these templates or creating your own templates and using those. There's really no reason not to use that to start off with. Now, if you want to select this item and you would say, okay, let's go to okay, now we have our node editing. This allows us to go ahead and make some modifications to our system. Now, of course, at this particular case, we don't really have a whole heck of a lot going on because this was a standard template. But if we were drawing our tree branch, our trunk, we would actually have some splines to work with. In this case, if you can see here, you have some default tools, the position, the rotation, and whatnot. Now, if I select this, you can see on this branch, I have some additional. I can say the start angle of the spline and the roll, I can turn that a little bit, and it makes it really easy to go in there and customize your tree a little bit, because by default it looks like it's a default, so you want to just kind of tweak it around a little bit and everyone is happy. Okay, so now we've tweaked our tree using the node editing, which I think is fantastic. We can go in and start adding some of our assets. Now, we want to have leaves, we want to have coins, we want to have, there's two types of coins, and we want to have dollar bills in order to make this tree look good. So you'll see by default when we created our branches, it created a level 1 and a level 2. This is just a default setting. If you were going to create your own main branches here, you would just be adding an additional level instead of 2 levels. So just think about that. Now, it automatically knows which level it is. Honestly, trunk is the first level, but it calculates it differently in SpeedTree. So trunk is 1, level 1 is actually 2, and level 2 is actually 3. So if you've ever used L systems, you sort of know that routine fairly well. Okay, so let's go ahead and add another template. I'm going to go to the leave section. I'm just going to select standard, and we're going to go ahead and plug that into our tree. Now, these are the real-time leaves, which means that these are just cards that are facing the camera. It's very important that you realize when it's facing the camera, when you export these out,
all the leaves are going to be facing in a specific direction that you'll have to either program in your application to face the camera, or you'll need to use not real-time leaves in order to build your tree. But in this case, we're going to customize these anyway, so it doesn't really matter. I'm going to change this geometry of these cards into files. Now, in order to start using geometry inside of SpeedTree, we're going to replace, we can build our own trunks, we could build our own leaves or fruit, it doesn't really matter. Everything happens through this Mesh Asset tab. Now, you're probably familiar with the Materials tab, but the Mesh Assets tab is where you're going to focus on. So let's go ahead and click on the plus sign up here in the corner, and we're going to find our meshes. I have my coin object and my bill object. And you'll notice that when you import this coin, it looks like it's on a weird axis, and it actually is. SpeedTree by default is using the Z up. We want the Y up right-handed. So this is how our pretty much all the visual effects applications, except for 3D Studio Max and some architectural apps, and I believe Endorphin and some motion captures, they're all on the Z up, which is pretty annoying because you always have to convert them with either Python or whatnot to get it into the Y up. But let's continue on with the Y up, which is really, I would say, the new default for all applications in the last 10 years. So knowing that, we've turned this around, and we can go into our leaves section, and inside of our settings, we got to go ahead and find it. Generation, forces, we're looking for the leaves, there we go. Leaves are where you would set all your properties. Now, inside of here, you see the type. I need to add a parameter there so that we can have the choice of what type we want. By default, you'll see that the cards are there. This is the size setting for these cards. Now, I don't want the cards in there. I want my coin. So I'm going to go in there and change that, and you're going to see that this updates and modifies, which is fine. Now, we want to change the size of that because that's completely huge. So we're going to go ahead and put in a 0.5 parameter, and you'll see that all our little coins are hanging off of the tree, which is great. By default, everything's working pretty smoothly. They might not be the best looking coins, but bear with me. Now, there's no material on any of these items, so let's start thinking about materials because it's going to tie into what I'm talking about next before we import any other assets. So the first thing we should do is start from the ground up. In my opinion, start from the ground up. We'll go ahead and click on our tree trunk here, and we are going to need to create some materials by importing some existing textures that I've stolen from the SpeedTree library. I've just taken a random collection of textures that I thought that would look good. Really no reason to reinvent the wheel, or the tree in this case, because they have a ton of different textures in their library. So I really recommend taking a look at them. Matter of fact, their tree library is pretty robust. You almost can get away with any type of forest with what they have in there. So it's just the custom trees you sort of have to worry about for the most part. Anyway, you want to go ahead and click on the plus button here to bring in some materials. Now, I want to start with the tree. Now, the tree trunk texture that I swapped, I had two actually, the willow bark and the sycamore. I'm going to go ahead and take the sycamore, and because that it has the underscore normal suffix after it, you'll see that it actually imports both the textures, or it should. Yeah, there it goes. So now we have both the textures side by side, the normal map, so it's all there. Now, we need to apply it to our trunk, and we need to go into our Materials tab and look for it. The Materials tab is right here. So in the branch section, we're going to go ahead and say, okay, we want the texture called sycamore bark, and it's going to update. Because I'm recording the screen, the Camtasia doesn't seem to be liking anything on OS X Lion at this particular point. So you'll see some slowdowns in SpeedTree too. So just be aware that this is much faster when you're not going through all this kind of stuff. Now, I'm going to select one more texture. I need to bring in the money, let's say. That's going to be my dollar bill. And I don't need a subsequent amount of textures for that one. Just the dollar bill itself is going to be fine. I'm going to bring in my coin, and the coin I'm going to say Let's go ahead and bring in the silver coin color first. And because I didn't name them according to the specifications used by SpeedTree, I have to go in and add my normal maps separately, which is fine. I don't care. I'll go in and say, okay, there's my silver coin normal map, and that's cool. And I have specular. I can actually go ahead and select the specular. Not really necessary because we're going to do all this again in our final application with the FBX. So let's go into the specular and grab that. And now we have our specular. So this is what we want our coin to look like. So I'm going to select our leaves, our first leaf, and there it goes. So now remember, because I have the parameter set where I'm not stacking up these tabs, I have to go in and find everything, which is fine. So I'm going to go into the leaves, and I'm going to select my material, and I'm going to select the silver coin. And it's going to take a second to update. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in. And you can see that our coin is there. And if I rotate around a little bit, you might be able to get a little bit of the specular look to it. Okay, well, that is just fine and dandy. Of course, you can now set, a random amount of parameters. We can spend all day on that. I don't think we're going to do that. But here's all the different parameters for the tree. Now, I would like to set the entire system to be in quads. Now, everybody likes quads these days. Back in the day, people were using triangles, but quads brings a nice mesh, especially when you're doing subdivisions later down the line. You want to keep those quads intact, even though it does convert to triangles during render time. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and select the leaves, and let's see if there's any quick parameters we can talk about before importing some of the other stuff. All right, now the generation, we don't need to really mess with any of that stuff. And the pruning, we could certainly prune the growth of the coins, but we want to keep them in there. I'm going to actually leave the pruning in as much as possible. But if you want to select the pruning, you just go ahead in and you could actually just go ahead and start tweaking the pruning. Again, this is going to be kind of computational. You can see how the pruning actually starts to remove the coins in certain areas. I don't want to mess with that too much. I want to bring my coins as much as possible. Okay, and without further ado, I'm going to start bringing in some of my other assets, and everything's looking pretty good so far. Okay, I'm going to leave everything the way it is, and the when parameter is active. Okay, good. So let's go ahead and right click on level 2, and I'm going to bring up the add template, and I'm going to say leaves. Let's go ahead and bring in another standard real time. I like to use that one as my base. And let's go ahead and bring in an actual leaf pattern so we can start to see this thing come together. So I'm going to go ahead and inside my materials, sorry that it's off the thing there, I'm going to go ahead and bring in the leaves. I like to say, let's start with the sample leaves 1. Now, remember, specular and normal are named accordingly, so it's going to import those in properly. You see all 3 of these textures are now imported side by side. I'm going to go ahead and apply that to my tree. And I'm going to select cards are fine. I'm going to select the simple leaves 1. And I'm going to leave the size as it is as well. So now I can go ahead and zoom in. Let's go ahead and take a look at our tree here. You can see that we have a pretty basic tree. Now, to me, the pattern of the single leaves is kind of annoying, so we're going to want to break that up with a secondary leaf texture. Now, the more the merrier, technically, right? The more variation that you can have, but we want to keep our assets as light as possible. I'm going to go ahead and right-click, adding a template of standard leaves, one more time, leaves, and say standard. And I'm going to drag that over level 2, give that a second to update, and I'm going to select a new type of material, but I'll have to import it first. Let's go ahead and grab our leaves 2, which is right here, sample leaves 2. Again, all these textures can be found somewhere within the either default application or in their library, and you could use them as much as you want. or create your own, doesn't really matter. I'm going to select my sample leaves too. And now what we have is a little bit of a variation. And as you can see, now we have a tree that doesn't look as unified as it did before. So the next thing to do is to add some more assets. I'm going to add my gold coin next by importing the material for that first. Let's go ahead and say gold coin color, and that is our item there. Inside the normal map, let's go ahead and bring in our normal as well. That's that one, and just for fun, let's go ahead and grab our specular. Specular, gold coin, specular. Now, I have a strange feeling that Camtasia is going to do something evil, so I'm going to go ahead and save out this tree. And I'm going to select money tree 02, and that's going to be the name of our tree. Now our tree is saved, and maybe some of our memory is freed up a little bit. Now, what we'll do is take a look at our tree and say, okay, we want to add some gold coins by adding another leaf. Add template. We'll go to leaves and say standard art, and then we'll go and drag that to our leaves too, and it's going to automatically reorganize. So inside of the leaves, we got to go ahead and select the type, and we're going to select geometry coin. And because our last coin, the size that we had was 0.5, let's go ahead and make this 0.6 to give it some variation. And we're going to go ahead and add our material, which is the gold coin color. Now, we have the basis of our tree. I saw that right here we had a gold coin added. You can just go ahead and look and find. Of course, rendering something like this might look good with the wind on, so the coins can actually catch a little bit of that reflection and color in the final render. So think about that. Okay, so now we're going back a little bit back to get an overall view, and now we need our final money maker, which is the money itself. So I am going to import one last item, saying add template. Yep, Camtasia is making SpeedTree mad. Let's go to the leaves and say standard, and I'm going to add that to this level. I could actually create a secondary level, but in this case I'm just going to go ahead and add it all to the same level. And I'm going to go ahead and bring in my dollar bill, which I have not done yet. So I'll bring in another mesh. It's the bill, and you'll see that it's pretty basic, nothing special. But I need to go ahead and create the Y up. It's very important. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. Okay, so now what we're going to do is going to bring in a bill as the leaf object there. And for that material, we're going to select the money 01. And we're going to wait for it to update. There we go. Now we have a money tree. Now, obviously, the money is a little bit too big, so we're just going to quickly go ahead and select 2 as the size. It might be too small, but based on our quarter size, I'm going to try to keep it kind of comparable. So there we go. There is our money tree, and we are all done with this very basic tutorial on how to create custom geometry inside of SpeedTree. The next videos that we launch are going to have several complicated topics, such as creating ecosystems inside of ecosystems using fractal technology. We're also going to talk about importing ground geometry and populating a forest. We're going to talk about the Houdini OTL importing and all the shaders that were created for the SpeedTree FBX import. And we're going to try to show some dynamics, actually putting some water drops on top of leaves and having them cascade down. So, if you're interested in seeing the sequel, please visit www.cmivfx.com and send us some emails at sales@cmivfx.com letting us know that you're interested in seeing the sequel. For more information, please visit thespeedtree.com and see if you can get a demonstration version of SpeedTree. And we hope to see you on the forums. Talk soon. Bye.